Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Making Milestones podcast. Today's episode topic is something that I'm very passionate about and that I think is a really important topic across all industries, the horse industry included, and I'm very excited to discuss it. One thing before we get started that I want to say is my computer is making a weird sound right now, so if you can hear like dull, like kind of groaning noise in the background, it's because of that. I can't afford a new computer right now, so we're just gonna have to deal with it. Hopefully my mic doesn't pick it up, but just full disclosure, if that's what you're hearing, that's why it's there. Continue watching my podcasts and share them to help me get a new computer, because I think mine is on its way out. Anyways, thank you for supporting my content, and I really appreciate any and all support people have to offer. Anything that you're interested in supporting me for, like be it shopping at my store, buying some of my webinars or teaching materials, looking at my Patreon and subscribing there for tutorials and more. All of the information for doing that is down below in the description of this podcast, so you can check it out there. But anyways, let's just jump right into this topic. So this topic I have discussed a little bit in other settings. Like I've talked about the misogyny that mares experience in the horse industry and how it's kind of like internalized misogyny that we then project onto mares. And it's like female stereotypes that we see directed at humans that are then being given to horses who are also female. I wanted to talk more at length about that because I think that this is a really sad issue, especially since the horse industry is a female-dominated sport. And we see a lot of misogyny that is internalized by women that they then project onto other women. But also, even though it's female-dominated, we also see a lot of men being misogynistic towards women. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is that I think it's a really important topic. Like becoming successful in the horse industry in spite of oppressive forces like patriarchal mindsets is still something to be proud of, but we shouldn't have to overcome these inherent biases and prove ourselves to a way greater extent than what other more privileged demographics might have to, because people don't take us seriously at face value. That shouldn't be a thing. So what I want to try to get across in talking about this is that for the women who have managed to push through any of the doubt that has been projected onto them by other people in the community where they've felt the need to prove themselves, and they have done that. This isn't to take away from the work that you have put in to establish yourself as an equestrian or as a professional in the horse community. This isn't about that at all. However, despite being able to overcome those things with work, there are certain biases and discriminatory mindsets that should not exist in the first place and that we should not have to overcome. And there's certain little microaggressions that are used in everyday speech or when women are being contradicted in their statements by other people that at their core are rooted in this patriarchal mindset that undervalues women as a whole. And one more clarification that I want to make is regardless of people's gender identity, I'm going to kind of use like when I'm saying women, this isn't to like misgender anyone, but it's like the concept of it is essentially any marginalized gender group that I'm referencing, because we would see non-binary people meeting these similar types of attitudes where because of who they are having their value undervalued and kind of demonized by people who don't want to understand them and who are committed to misunderstanding them and committed to the idea of viewing them as less valuable human beings and less deserving of respect. And similarly, we see this similar mindset in the homophobia that will then also be projected at people that are in the LGBTQ community. So it's kind of all connected. Like, as far as I'm concerned, the patriarchal mindset that is behind misogyny directed at women is also causing harm to a bunch of different marginalized groups, where at its core, the mindsets that are used to discriminate them are about this perceived superiority or perceived lack of value in these marginalized groups. And the idea, whether people overtly admit to it or not, or whether they're consciously aware of it or not, the idea that these marginalized groups are less valuable and therefore need to prove themselves more before they can be taken seriously than what someone else would. And by someone else, I'm typically referencing straight white men. And again, if you're a straight white man listening to this isn't to undervalue the work that you've put in either, or like your knowledge and expertise as an equestrian or horse person. This isn't about that at all. However, it is important to recognize your privilege in the sense that acknowledging that there's certain obstacles that you never have to overcome, that other people have to perpetually scramble over in order to continue this journey of proving themselves and being taken seriously and making it somewhere in the horse world. So it's not to say that these male trainers and riders are less talented or less valuable, but it's to say that there are certain obstacles that they never have to overcome because of the nature of how our world works. And this is not a horse industry specific thing. It's something that is rampant in all other aspects of the world as well. And it just happens to be seen in the horse industry because of all of those mindsets. So it's not to undervalue anyone's work. Like, there's a lot of phenomenal male trainers out there that are doing great work and have a lot to teach to people. And that's fantastic. But the thing that is a problem is the fact that they oftentimes at face value are taken a lot more seriously than a lot of female trainers are, especially at younger ages. Like, a younger man who's become a trainer is more likely to be taken with authority and be viewed as a knowledgeable person than a young woman. Young women tend to be infantilized a lot, where people will just like talk about their inexperience, about how young they are, and will use certain types of language that are microaggressions that serve the purpose of trying to downplay her level of expertise and downplay her ability to be able to share knowledge. Similarly, if a woman speaks assertively and is direct and straight to the point, oftentimes she is labeled as aggressive or a bitch or like mean and overbearing and pushy, and they get these really unfavorable descriptors applied to them. Whereas a man doing the same thing is viewed as authoritative, a good teacher, a teacher that cuts to the chase and doesn't beat around the bush, someone that trains without feeling the need to coddle their students, and all of these other descriptors that are framing the very same types of behaviors in a more favorable light, even when those types of behaviors actually at their core are more aggressive language than what the women are using in the same types of situations. So there's a lot of mindsets involved in a lot of moving parts that change the perspective of how women are perceived in the horse world and how their work is valued in the horse world, despite this being a female-dominated industry. And what I also want to reiterate is that being a woman does not mean you cannot be misogynistic. Being part of a marginalized demographic does not mean that you can't have behaviors that are working against allowing you to be an equal member of society. A lot of women in the horse world will try to take on more traditionally patriarchal traits in order to assimilate into a culture where they otherwise did not feel accepted and heard. And oftentimes it's of benefit, because if they end up taking on some of these misogynistic tendencies that men have and kind of like laughing at jokes that are at their core making fun of women, or engaging in behaviors that at their core are degrading women in some capacity, they are often rewarded by the men around them by being more accepted and included in things. And then this is then reinforcing it and encourages them to continue the behaviors. And they oftentimes don't even realize what they are doing. I have been someone that has done this in the past. I've been what I would call like a pick-me woman, where I would do things with the purpose of trying to win the favor of men that were inherently working against other women. And I didn't even realize what I was doing at the time. It was something that I had learned to do as like a survival tactic to be taken seriously and to feel heard and listened to and appreciated by people who would otherwise degrade me as a person. And it's something that I learned outside of the horse world, but then it transferred in to how I participate in the horse world. And it's also something that I've been taught by other women role models who have had to do the same thing in order to be taken seriously and have had to be taking on more patriarchal roles in order to be valued and viewed as a experienced, knowledgeable person in the industries that they work in. So a lot of people will do that as a survival tactic, whether they realize it or not. You don't need to be outside of the marginalized group in order to participate in the marginalization. And I think that's a really important thing to say. So the reason why I wanted to talk about this topic now is that, one, the other day was International Women's Day, so I think that it's a very timely topic. And two, recently I've been having an influx of middle-aged white men being really disrespectful to me, and I've noticed like a lot of patterns. And by recently, I'm kind of referencing over the last couple of years, but there was an event that was super recent that I'll get to in a little bit. And what I mean by the last couple of years is that my following of men, like my demographic, audience demographic of men, has more than doubled over the last few years. I'm still predominantly followed by women. It's something like 85% women and then 15% men. But in the past, it was like 2% men and 98% women. So it has really dramatically increased, like on my platforms, in terms of my male following. And with that, I have noticed an influx of disrespect, misogynistic tendencies, and just general degradation of me as a person without even taking the chance to like look at any of my content. They just see a video of me saying anything, they see that I'm a woman, and then they just start degrading me. And in particular, what I've noticed is that a lot of times when men are degrading women in the horse world, they'll use pet names. They'll use terms like sweetheart, sweetie, honey, oh, like, oh, you sweet little girl. They'll use names to infantilize you and kind of disrespect you. And like people could go, oh, like those are pet names that are like the purpose of like fondness. And they can be, if the person saying them is someone who is close to you and has that type of relationship. But when they are used within the context of trying to degrade what you are saying and they start throwing these pet names around, the purpose is a microaggression that is to infantilize the woman and try to dumb her down to being childlike. And that is what I hate so much. You do not see men doing this to each other, even in times of disagreement. They won't go onto a man's page and be like, oh, sweet baby boy, like blah, 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 blah. I disagree with you for XYZ reasons. Or, oh, honey, like sweetheart, da, 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 da. They won't do those things. They don't. They simply do not do that because it is a tactic that is primarily directed at women for the purpose of degrading them. And it is very commonly directed at young women specifically. Like if they see that you are younger than them, they're 10 times more likely to do this. And again, people could be like, oh, it's like an age thing where it's normal for like old men to do that. It's not normal for any person to call a complete stranger like a pet name, especially in the context of degrading them. Like if you are disagreeing with someone actively, you're not saying things out of fondness. So therefore using terms that at their core are supposed to be endearment terms, it doesn't line up. The purpose of it is to just kind of, dumb someone down and degrade them and try to make them feel small and kind of just like, oh, like sweetie, like you think you know what you're talking about, but you really don't. And that is a tactic that is so commonly directed at women, specifically women. I see it so often, like to the point, like honestly, and again, people can disagree with me if they want, but this is what I have seen on my own channels. And the only person who gets all the notifications and like knows how I feel internally and knows what patterns I've learned to recognize is myself. And it's to the point where when I see the name of someone that sounds like they are a man, especially if their profile is like a man in a cowboy hat, immediately I'm kind of a bit on the defense and I'm ready to open a comment that is degrading me in some capacity. And when it ends up being a nice comment, I'm actually pleasantly surprised because it is more unusual for it to actually be a nice supportive comment instead of a degrading one. It's actually more unusual and I'm pleasantly surprised. Whereas with women, it can go either way. I don't expect women to degrade me at face value. Like a lot of women do disagree with me and a lot of them do degrade me as a person in their disagreement. But the context in which they do it is a lot different. There aren't these misogynistic undertones most of the time. Sometimes there are. But again, I think that is a learned behavior from the culture that we have grown up in and how we have had to adapt rather than it being something that is used to essentially marginalize a group of people. With that said, I am like really happy to see more and more men supporting me over a period of time. However, like with my male following increasing, I have also been the victim of a lot more disrespect than I have in previous years at the hands of men. And I often get people mocking me, like one for just being, oh, like you're just like a clicker training Karen. Oh, that's so sweet. Like you little tree hugging, like cookie thumping girl who thinks she knows what she's talking about. That's so cute. That's so cute that you think that you can do XYZ thing. That's so cute that you think you're a trainer. Oh, like she's just playing pretend and she's just like, what a cutie patootie, just like kind of making out these fake concepts and trying to share them with people like she knows something. Like the entire dialect that they are using is to degrade me as a person and kind of write off what I do as just being cutesy and just like playing with horses and just like snuggling them and feeding them cookies and not doing any real training. And they'll be like, oh, real trainers don't feed their horses cookies. Real trainers don't do XYZ. You're just like a treat feeding, cookie thumping horse snuggler, like a little horse hugger who's not actually doing any real training. The real trainers would never do that. And it's just like, just dripping with degrading messaging. And not even for a second, like even if I reply with like citations of where they can look and learn more, they never open them. You can tell by how they respond. They never open them. They never consider what I'm saying. They have already made up their mind as soon as they've come on my page and have seen that I'm a young woman. And this is at its core the problem. It's not that you can't be distrusting of new information or that you can't question people or that you can't disagree with them. But if you inherently treat people different simply because of their gender, and you're more likely to have a bias against specific gender identities than you are against others, that is a problem. It is a huge problem. And what I've also noticed with this, and again, like people can take this as they will, like this is my opinion and it's also the opinion that I've seen other women share. But male trainers in the horse community can share ideas that have been being shared by women for long periods of time, and the women can be laughed off for sharing these same opinions. But then as soon as a more prominent and known male trainer shares it, it is taken so much more seriously, and they're like, oh wow, like what a great idea, what a visionary coming up with this idea, even if it was first brought about by a female trainer. And at its core, they are just taken more seriously for the information that they share. And I do think that a lot of the hatred that is directed at clicker training in specific comes from this patriarchal mindset where it's like this dominance-based culture and like being a man and like showing the horse who's boss and feeling big and powerful. I think a lot of those attitudes are rooted in this patriarchal society and things that we've learned outside of the horse world that we have then brought towards horses. And it's why there's like this dominance-based mindset where you need to overcome and like overpower this big animal to feel like a real trainer. And it's been trickling down to so many different generations of people. And it's something that women also teach, obviously. I'm not saying that this is just like a man's way of teaching, but it's a dominance-based culture that is like dripping with the same ideology that we see with toxic masculinity, where it's like, don't cry, don't whine, you need to be dominant, you need to be assertive, you need to man up and like not be a little baby. And it's even like projected onto people to the point where if you fall off and you get injured, it's like, get back on the horse, don't be a chicken. Like if you're not hurt enough to go to the hospital, you need to get back on that horse or you're not a real rider. And there's all these attitudes where it's like, you're not a real rider unless you've fallen off XYZ amount of times. Or like, you're just like a chicken if you're not going to get back on that horse. Like and it's devaluing people for prioritizing safety and slowness. It's devaluing people for not being willing to press on during things that they are uncomfortable with. It's devaluing people for showing emotion. And it's making them out to be weaker and less valuable and less successful as trainers and less able to train simply because they're operating from a more emotional standpoint. And we also see this where when people are talking about considering the horse's emotions in training and avoiding stress and valuing the horse's say in things more and trying to train in a way where the horse is in a positive mindset and where it is enjoyable and nice for the horse, this is also degraded and it's viewed as like woo woo and like just like coddling the horse and like just being like oversensitive and over emotional. And it's degraded as well. Like it's viewed as this horrible thing to consider the emotions of another animal. And I do think that those mindsets at their core are coming from people who have had their emotions devalued and ignored. And then they are projecting that deep-seated hurt and lack of being heard onto the people and animals around them because their emotions have never held importance in how they were raised. They haven't felt heard. They haven't been encouraged to express emotion. The idea of expressing emotion has been taught to be a bad thing, and it's been taught to be a sign of weakness and something that you need to mask and stuff down and hide away. So they have all of these emotions and bad feelings for years that they've just been collecting inside of them and never fully feeling, because it's viewed as this terrible thing to have the audacity to feel your emotions, and it's viewed as a sign of weakness, when really being vulnerable and sharing your emotional state and being honest about it and not hiding those emotions and just being real and authentic, that is a massive strength, because being vulnerable is hard. Being vulnerable in your weaknesses and your strengths and in your hurt and in your joy, that is a hard thing to do, because it opens you up to a lot more criticism, especially when we live in a society where it is viewed as a weakness to feel things. And that honestly stems from this toxic masculinity aspect. So I think that there's a lot of things that we learn in our everyday society before we ever touch a horse that we then learn to kind of project onto horses. And I do think that the dominance-based culture is thoroughly supported by toxic masculinity and the idea that it's a weakness to like slow down, consider emotions, and kind of like value well-being and training. Like, it's even projected onto kids. Like, if a kid can't learn something fast enough, or if they're struggling in school, or if they struggle with things that other kids might have an easy time with, it's viewed as a problem within them rather than something that is not supporting them within their learning program. It's viewed as a problem with the learner rather than the learning environment. And we see the same thing with horses. If a horse struggles with things that other horses might be able to succumb to and listen, the horse is viewed as a rank horse or a stupid horse, or a horse that is just like less valuable and nice than other horses, when it should be viewed as a problem within the program of the teacher, because as a teacher, it is your job to cater to all different learning styles. And a lot of people don't. They have this very cut and dry, cookie cutter way of doing things all the same way. And then when a horse gets a bad reaction, it is then blamed on the horse. It is often never looked as a fault from the trainer, where it's like they missed a step or they weren't going at the pace that this particular horse needed. It's viewed as a fault within the horse. Even with things like for starting horses under saddle, if a horse freaks out when it's saddled, it's viewed as the horse being stupid, and people will go, oh, well, like some horses just do that and you can't avoid it. And, you know, maybe like that's true in a very small minority of cases. I'm not convinced that it is, because I think that that's a very convenient excuse to justify that you haven't missed any steps and not to look for faults within yourself. But even if it is true, it's not true to the extent of where we see it online, where it's happening all the time. And it's the same idea with like horses who pull back. The trainers that have horses pulling back really violently when they're being tied and learning how to tie, they often have lots of horses in their program over the course of years that are doing the same thing. And it's interesting to me that there's trainers who have this mindset that it's unavoidable and there's nothing they can do about it, that just perpetually have horses that have these problems, whereas other ones who take the time to put the training process in to help these horses not be scared don't have those problems. But then it's labeled as those trainers who don't have those problems as having easier horses, which is, again, a very convenient way of avoiding accountability and insinuating that other trainers who don't have the same issues as you are only not having those issues because they're less talented and they're dealing with less hard horses. Like, it's the easiest way to evade accountability, because essentially you can justify anything that happens in your training program and go, oh, like, you just have easier horses if you're not having these big explosive problems, and like, you're just not a very good trainer because you don't get rank horses if you don't have these reactions. And then for people who are insecure, they feel the need to almost create those reactions, because if they don't, they aren't viewed as good of a trainer by these types of people. And it completely allows them to just duck and avoid and dodge any and all accountability for any mistake they make in training, because they can just write it off as them having all of these rank horses and just being such a good trainer that they get sent the worst of the worst horses. Meanwhile, there's a ton of clicker trainers out there who get horses that have severe aggression problems and severe fear problems and are super dangerous horses, but they train in a way where they keep the horse so under threshold that they're not creating these dangerous behaviors, because they don't, one, want to hurt themselves, and two, create a stress response when they're trying to create a horse who's no longer stressed and no longer feels the need to engage in those stress responses. And instead of it being viewed as them being good at training slow and training within the horse's emotional threshold, it's viewed as them having easier horses. And I don't think it's a coincidence that there is so much degrading language used at clicker trainers in specific, when a lot of the people who are most publicly showcasing clicker training are women. I do think that a lot of the degradation that we see directed at the clicker training community stems from the fact that it is predominantly comprised of women across all types of animal species, including dog trainers. And I think that a lot of the disrespect we see, once again, is the issue of misogyny, and it's being directed at women being less talented and just being like too soft. And like there's also this idea in the horse world that being soft in training is a bad thing, and that it's letting horses walk all over you and just being a doormat and just being like a hippy dippy type trainer who creates dangerous horses because you don't set boundaries. And it's this commitment to not understanding the process of how you actually train when you're training in this way. And it's very frustrating because these people want so badly to be able to criticize the heck out of clicker trainers. They want to be able to criticize every little thing that they do, but then they're not willing to put the work in to actually understand what they are even criticizing. So their criticisms are rooted in this caricature that they have created of the positive reinforcement community and how they believe positive reinforcement works, when really it's not actually accurate at all. And it is completely just entire bullshit lies that they've created. Like they're writing fiction about how the process of clicker training a horse actually works. Like they go, oh, you're bribing them. Like, oh, like you just feed them a cookie every time they do something bad. Oh, like, yeah, if you just stuff your horse full of cookies all the time, yeah, they won't be able to feel anything or be nervous. And like all of that stuff's not true. Like a horse who's nervous stops eating when they're in fight or flight mode. They don't think about eating because they're thinking about survival. It's the same with people. When you're really anxious and you're having a nervous response, you lose your appetite. Your stomach gets upset. You're no longer hungry. You're no longer fixated on eating, and you will stop eating. Everyone has felt that feeling where something happens and you feel your stomach drop and suddenly your appetite is gone and you cannot eat because you're too stressed or too scared or too anxious and you cannot eat. And the same is true with horses. So that's not true. Also, bribery precedes a behavior rather than following it. Reward always follows a behavior. The horse only gets rewarded for the correct behavior once they have accomplished that behavior. And that is the nature of positive reinforcement. But these people who want to criticize positive reinforcement never actually want to learn about what they are criticizing. They just want to be able to blindly criticize whatever they want without ever actually having to put the work into like understanding what it is that they're criticizing. So anyways, what I wanted to talk about specifically is that recently, like over the last couple of the last few days, there's this man on Facebook that again, a white man, a straight white man. So man on Facebook that was really clearly triggered by my content. And the reason why he was triggered by my content was that a few weeks ago, or maybe like a month ago, probably back in early February or January, he commented on one of my posts and was essentially saying that positive reinforcement wasn't effective for teaching horses stuff. And I was like, that's not true. There's a lot of studies that support the exact opposite of that. So until there's evidence that that's actually true, I'm not inclined to believe it. He wasn't happy when I wouldn't accept his authority and his opinion, and he kind of threw around like, I've been in the industry for XYZ amount of years and have trained this number of horses, and like I know what I'm talking about, and like the studies that have been done don't have large enough sample sizes and they're not real scientific studies. Here's the degree that I have. Essentially, I know everything. And I was like, look, like I've seen enough with my anecdotes in terms of like personal experiences with horses from when I switched to using a purely negative reinforcement based program to using as much positive reinforcement as possible. I've noticed the changes myself before my very eyes, and they're also supported by studies across all different types of mammalian species, not just horses. So I'm going to just go with this until there's actually evidence that that's true, because like I can see my horses learning and retaining information for longer than they did when I was training the same types of behaviors with negative reinforcement. And he really didn't like that. So he continued to just degrade my experience on my page and just be jumping down my throat and just saying that I was like naive and that I was like peddling like woo-woo hippy dippy type bullshit and just kind of degrading what I was doing and saying that it's not practical for real horse training and that it's never going to catch on and da 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 da. And like, you know, one takeaway that I want to say from this is that a lot of these people who hate clicker training, they go off about how it's never going to become mainstream and it's never going to be a real thing. And if they actually truly believe that, why the fuck are they so threatened by it? They don't actually believe that. I'm going to answer that question myself. They don't actually believe it's not going to catch on, because if they did, they'd be able to go about their day-to-day life without being so triggered by positive reinforcement trainers, but they can't because they are freaking terrified about the idea of it catching on, because they are committed to not even considering the possibility of changing any aspect of how they do things with horses. And the idea of having something that is so far against what they do catch on to the point where more and more people start to do it, and they start to kind of feel left behind the growth in the horse world, and they're getting left behind where we're developing and changing things with the more knowledge that we have, and they've committed to stagnating. The more people move on and grow and change, the more their lack of desire to do so is exposed, and they feel threatened and triggered by that. If people actually truly believed that positive reinforcement trainers were shittier trainers, couldn't accomplish anything with horses, and didn't know what they were talking about, and weren't real trainers, and that their methods would never catch on, they would not be threatened by them. They would be able to go on with their lives and be like, my training speaks for itself. This is not a problem, and this is never going to catch on, so it's never going to impact my clientele whatsoever. But they don't do that because deep down, they are terrified about how these things are catching on and how they can see the horse industry changing, and they get very triggered by it. So anyways, this man was very, very triggered to the point where, like, weeks after having this interaction on my page, he wrote a post about me on his page and literally said that I'm like the most dangerous person in the horse community, which is hilarious. I'm not going to name his name because I don't, one, want to put him on blast, and two, I don't want to give him attention. He doesn't deserve attention. That's what he's craving. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, so I can't like effectively diagnose someone, but there's a lot of narcissistic tendencies that I am seeing on this post, because he was blocking and deleting comments from anyone who disagreed with him, anyone who even liked a comment that disagreed with him. And he blocked me and my mom before posting this. So the only reason why I even heard about this post was because of people sending it to me. So one, he closed any and all dialogue for me to respond. Not that I was going to, because again, I don't want to give him attention. And two, anyone who stood up for me or stood up for any principle of mine, whether they like me as a trainer or not, was blocked and had their comment deleted. And he essentially told people, this is my page, only my word goes, and what I say is the law, basically, is essentially what he said to people before deleting their comments and blocking them. He then limited comments on the post so that other people couldn't comment, and they had to like his page to comment. And then he was bragging about how many followers he gained from people liking his page just so that they could comment. So I think that it was definitely like a pull for attention. And also, like, for someone who is confident in what they do, they don't need to block any potential naysayers. They don't need to delete comments to curate a comment section that essentially is only applauding their every move. They don't need to block the people that they're talking about out of fear of them responding. They don't need to do any of those things because they can stand by their position so well that they're not threatened by the potential for people to try to deviate from that and argue with them. They can, their point speaks for itself, and they're ready to defend it, and they can do so with courage and a backbone that allows for them to have disagreeing people in the comments and still stand by their opinion. The amount of people who argue in my comment section and tell me that I'm stupid and tell me that I'm wrong and disagree with everything that I do is a lot, because I posted a lot of controversial opinions on my pages. I only block people if they're really repeatedly disrespectful to me and like rude and degrading, or attacking other people, or posting racist, homophobic bullshit where they are just being really vitriolic. That's the only time I block people. I do not block people for just disagreeing with me. That's why there's a lot of comments that are disagreeing with me on all of my posts. I will not block people for that. I have never blocked this man from my page, and I won't, because I think that discourse is important, and I stand by what I do enough that whether or not people agree with me, I can stand by my point comfortably and feel confident in what I do because I believe in it. And I also believe in my capacity to change if the information changes. This man clearly doesn't, because he had to protect himself from all criticism by blocking and deleting comments to create an environment that made it look like everyone agreed with him, and to create a persona of being like superior. He wanted to feel superior over me. So anyways, I'm going to read some of the stuff from posts. He quoted me from one of my posts and said, I just saw a quote from one of the most dangerous equestrian influencers on the internet. She wrote, "People cannot stand the idea of traditional values being dismantled and more equestrians choosing to walk a different path." And then he said, "She is talking about dismantling over 2,300 years of horsemanship evolution in favor of her pretend, made-up ideas about the human-equine relationship." So let's unpack this a little bit. One, the most dangerous equestrian influencers on the internet. There are people who are like showcasing and highlighting horses flipping over backwards on them, bronching, pulling back, and getting into dangerous situations all the time in training and highlighting that as being a normal response. There are people who are creating reels of their horses freaking out and engaging in dangerous behaviors that could hurt or kill someone in the future, and just making a mockery of it and creating this mindset in the horse world that it's cool to endanger yourself. There are people who are deliberately endangering themselves and other horses on a repeated basis in the horse world, and also perpetuating training ideas that deliberately endanger clients by encouraging them to put horses into situations where they are so stressed that they feel the need to engage in really, really potent escape behaviors that are dangerous to people. The fact that he is trying to class me as one of the most dangerous equestrian influencers on the internet when I preach about keeping horses under threshold, low stress, and maintaining a good relationship with your horse and bringing them along slowly so as to avoid such dangerous moments with horses is the biggest fucking joke I have ever heard. And again, this post made me want to buy a mug that says like white man tears just to drink out of during like some of my lives and shit, because this is what this post feels like to me. It's a whiny little diatribe about me as a person because his ego was bruised by the fact that a young woman would not agree with him and he couldn't take it. And one thing that I want to also note is that typically you won't see this type of response of men talking about other men like this ever. And also he is totally devaluing my education and my work as a trainer by just referencing me as an equestrian influencer. Like, yes, technically with my social platforms, I would be classed as a social media influencer, but that is just the byproduct of my business. I am a well-educated, certified IAABC equestrian behavior, equine behavior consultant, and I have ridden for the vast majority of my life. I have worked with horses in the racing industry. I've worked with horses in the Arabian show circuit. I've worked with jumpers. I've worked with young horses. I've started like hundreds of horses under saddle. I have started horses for all different types of disciplines, and I've worked with all different types of behavioral problems. And I have the certifications, the references, and the long-standing documentations of my work to prove that. And he is reducing all of that to me being an equestrian influencer because he is threatened by me. And I am literally a 5'4", 28-year-old girl who lives in a different country than this guy, I am pretty sure, because I'm in Canada and most of these people are in the US. So anyways, like, imagine being threatened by someone who can't fucking even reach the top drawer of like a cabinet. Like, honestly, this is what these types of people are threatened by. I'm a freaking person who feeds horses cookies to train them, and I'm like probably like at least a foot shorter than a lot of these people, but they're threatened by me. Anyways, the photo he chose of me is like me in like a pink like one of my shirts from my store. It's like a pink lace base layer and like a treat pouch. And I look like the least intimidating person ever. And like, it's a really good photo though. So like, honestly, shout out to him for choosing such a hot photo of me because it's like very flattering. And that was really nice of him because there's some ugly photos of me online that he could have chose, but he chose a hot one. So like, I'm honestly pretty proud of that. So thank you to him. Anyways, so what he said about me talking about dismantling over 2,300 years of horsemanship evolution in favor of my pretend made up ideas with the human equine relationship. This is where we see another attempt to degrade the words of a woman because he's degrading my ideas to being pretend and made up, despite how many of them are completely backed by science that has been developed over the course of decades. And like, behavioral science in general is like not a new concept. It has been well documented and studied for a very long time. And it's not pretend or made up. It is actually quantifiable, researched information that you can confirm by going to any scholarly search engine and looking up the wealth of studies that back the concepts that I talk about. And most of the stuff I talk about is backed by science, and I've even linked citations to a lot of things. But since he is threatened by me, he is reducing what I say to being pretend and made up ideas about the human equine relationship, despite there being like credible, empirical, peer-reviewed evidence of the concepts that I'm discussing, because he's threatened by me. And what I also want to note is that the post that he quoted me from, and what I also want to note is that the post that he is quoting me from is one that I made to talk about people embracing their authentic self and not being afraid to go with their heart and what feels right to them, even if it's something that doesn't get agreement from everyone around them, and that more equestrians are choosing to walk a softer path and kind of move away from the dominance mindset and embrace more favorable things and embrace the idea of science and welcome behavioral science into their training to allow them for a better understanding of horses. And it wasn't talking about dismantling over 2,300 years of horsemanship evolution. It is not talking about dismantling every single thing that we have ever heard about horses. That is not something I have ever said. And it's not about throwing every single idea that we have learned about horses ever, because not all of them are wrong. It's talking about improving with the time and letting go of outdated, archaic notions that have been disproven or at least called to question by credible research. But again, since he is threatened by it, he is devaluing what I have said to being just dismantling the whole thing because he felt threatened and attacked by it. And also what I want to note is that this is a man who has blocked my account, which means if you've blocked someone, you have to like unblock them, I'm pretty sure, to go look at their account, or maybe he blocked me after looking. But either way, this is a dude that does not follow me, that is so enraged by who I am as a person that he's just like hateful, like not even following, because at least following you get the stuff on your newsfeed, but he's like looking me up just to see over the content that I post, while pretending that I am a nobody who knows nothing and has pretend made up ideas that make no sense and hold no merit. He's this threatened by me. Anyways, he compared me to George Morris, who is a pedophile. Just to note, he thinks that being a treat training horse trainer is as dangerous as being a pedophile, apparently. Anyways, so I'm going to quote another thing that he said. This 28-year-old, and then he put this in quotes, horse trainer, so he doesn't really believe that I am a horse trainer, with her claimed 23 years of experience of horses, is leading her 60,000 plus social media followers down a path of ignorance and selfish entitlement. So her claimed 23 years of horsemanship, like I literally have photos of when I started riding, and it's like, again, all publicly documented. So like, it's not even just claimed, it just is. So again, he's trying to devalue the number of experiences that I have with, like the numbers of years of experiences that I have with horses, to try to make it out to be that I'm less experienced than I am. And he's also referencing my age once again in an attempt to infantilize me and derail my amount of experience based off of my age, which honestly, as far as I'm concerned, like if you're old like this dude is, and you're that stuck in your ways that you've effectively put the brakes on your ability to learn and expand your knowledge with your age, your level of learning honestly could be beneath the level of like an 11-year-old in a barn that's soaking up all information about horses and is really open to new ideas and just wants to learn everything. Like you could be less knowledgeable than someone who is improving at that rate because you have chosen to be so egotistical in the belief that there's no need for improvement, and that because of your age and your number of years in the horse world that you know everything. Like within the last like 3 to 5 years, I have learned more about horses than I have in the prior decade plus of working with horses, because that is when I opened my mind to new knowledge and really started to explore divergent ways of doing things without an inherent bias against them and like looking for confirmation bias to support the beliefs that I already had. I learned so much more as soon as that mindset changed, and I've learned more within the span of just a few years than I had in over a decade prior. And again, that doesn't speak for years of experience, because like I'd say that the most valuable learning years that I've had would have been within the last 5 or so years, or within like the last 6 or 7 years. Like Milo was like the catalyst to really changing the way that I approached horses. But I've learned a lot within the last several years, because it took a while for me to completely start to like dismantle the ego and insecurity that resulted in me being closed off to certain ideas and just insistent that they were wrong. So it took a while to get to the point where I was like open to these new ideas. And once I got to the point where I became more open-minded, I was able to soak up more information as a result and therefore learn faster. So I actually think like the use of age for experience and using the youngness of someone to completely disrespect their ability to learn and have valuable knowledge and be heard and have good insight and perspective is something that we see used everywhere in the world. Like also like a lot of the people who are running the world are old and they aren't doing a good job. The world is in complete disarray. The world is dying. There is a climate crisis. There's ongoing wars. They're putting billions of dollars into murdering other people in other countries. Meanwhile, they have like high homeless populations and poverty in their own countries. There's a housing crisis and there's all of these issues. And yet they want us to believe that being old and having experience and having lived a number of years immediately means that you know everything and that you're inherently more experienced and more able to teach and create order and do the right thing and have emotional intelligence and have integrity and have compassion and empathy than someone who is younger simply because you have more years of life than them. That is a load of shit. Anyone who's hung around kids can understand how the innocence and curiosity of children means that they are learning so much more, and they often ask really profound questions and notice really, really interesting things that adults have become so closed off to because of the conditioning processes that we go through. And yet there's this mindset that age brings intelligence and knowledge on a guaranteed basis to such an extent that anytime someone younger has the audacity to question the status quo, they are written off as being unintelligent or less knowledgeable simply because of their age. So one other thing that I want to note is that to say that I'm leading my 60,000 plus social media followers down a path of ignorance and selfish entitlement. There's nothing really selfish about my pages. Like, full disclosure, if I was doing the traditional aspect of like prioritizing showing and having really fancy tack and matching saddle pads and bonnets and having big explosive reactions with my horses in training and having things be exciting and fast paced, I would actually have more followers. I would get more attention because those are the posts that are blowing up. The posts of horses exhibiting stress behaviors and being explosive during training get tens of thousands and in some cases in the millions amount of views. And the people who are prioritizing training like that often have the highest number of followers because it is the most interesting to watch. So to claim that it's selfish entitlement for me to go about being my authentic self online and do things like talking about humanitarian crises that people would prefer to ignore, even though it loses me hundreds of followers, if not in the thousands at a time, saying that's selfish entitlement, fucking load of shit. It's because he's salty and bothered by what I do and he's trying to devalue what I say. And saying it's a path of ignorance when I tell people to do their own learning and continue to expand their knowledge, and I give them resources to continue doing so. I have a resources page that shows them how to look up scholarly search engine information, how to look up studies. I have studies listed on my website. I've shared studies. I've put together posts with citations to back what I say. So calling it ignorance, once again, is completely untrue because there are not very many pages that share their training views that actually support them with any type of scientific citation whatsoever. A lot of it is solely anecdotes. And that's not necessarily a wrong thing to do. You can share what you do with horses and base it on anecdotes and just show people the process. However, to claim that people who are taking the initiative to cite their articles are doing it for ignorance to lead people down a dangerous path, load of shit, like whiny white man tears. If he ever listens to this, which I doubt he will because he's committed to misunderstanding me, I just want him to know that. This is like a toddler throwing a temper tantrum because someone wouldn't agree with them and stroke their ego. And if you get this mad over a young woman refusing to take your word as law, then please go to therapy and address why it is that your ego is so fragile. This is the epitome of fragile masculinity, and this entire post is dripping with misogyny and speaking about me in a way that guaranteed he would not speak about another male trainer with this type of disrespect. I can almost guarantee it. But So he's saying that just as George Morris, Pat Pirelli, and others have exploited the human attraction to trendy new guru teachers, this young woman needs to come with a warning label. Another thing I want to note is that positive reinforcement isn't new. It is not a new guru thing to take from aspects of operant conditioning, something that has been studied for decades and decades and decades. That is not new. Nothing I do is new. Nothing I do is specific to me, other than the way in which I talk about things and how I write and structure my posts. Nothing I do in training is new. None of it is a new concept. It is not my own method. It is taking aspects of operant conditioning and using them and curating them to suit the specific environment and horse that I am working with. None of it is new. It is not new, and if you think that it is new, it just speaks for the lack of learning that you have done over the years, because none of it is new. It might be newer to the horse world to accept the idea of using positive reinforcement with horses, but positive reinforcement itself is not new. Shauna Karash has been training horses with positive reinforcement for decades. I did not bring this concept to the horse world. Far from it. I learned from other people who have kind of trailblazed the intro of positive reinforcement to the horse community. Shauna Karash being like a primary example of that. And I have learned from them and adopted this method into my training style now and used it because I've seen how it works and it meshes better with like what I want to do with horses and how I want my horses to feel about training. So that's a choice that I've made based off of what I've studied in school, what I've learned from other trainers who have trailblazed the way in terms of introducing clicker training to the horse world, and just what I have learned about even human psychology, because there's a lot of crossover between animal psychology and human psychology, and like the way we learn and think and the way animals learn and think when under stress. And so learning about all of that has just kind of completely reframed my thinking and how I approach training. But again, none of that information is new. I did not come up with it. I simply learned about it and I share about my learning and unlearning journey online, but I did not come up with any of it. So I guess shout out to him for giving me way more credit than I deserve if he thinks that I am doing something that is trendy and new, because it is not new. It might be trending more in that more people are starting to accept it, but it's still not the primary form of training. And I think that another thing to liken this to is like how people who are in a non-minority group, how often they feel attacked by the idea of including minority groups more and having them become more centered and decentralizing the ruling classes from being the focal point of everything. People who benefited from that and were the most represented by decreasing the representation of other marginalized groups, a lot of them end up feeling like they are being oppressed when they are no longer the center of attention. And I think this is a great example of that. People who train with traditional methods, when other methods are starting to be listened to and shared and followed with curiosity and interest, even in a way that is fractional compared to what the leading most used methods of training are in the horse world, they feel like they are being oppressed and somehow having something taken away from them because they are no longer the center of the universe, and people are becoming more open to methods that they don't want to subscribe to. And then this feels like a personal attack when it's really just an example of giving people more autonomy and choice to do what they want to do. So he also posted a comment that says that for the sake of transparency, I've blocked approximately 50 people from my page today as a result of comments on this post. After I did, I checked to see how many followers I lost in that exercise. Turns out the number of followers increased. Weird thing to say, but also the comments were limited. So for people to comment, they had to follow this dude. So take that with the information that you will. But again, it's interesting for someone to say that I'm doing this for selfish entitlement and ego and ignorance and doing it essentially just for attention is what he's implying. And then he has to go out of his way to talk about how many followers he's gained. I think that this is a classic case of projection, and it's a classic case of a man whose ego is bruised, trying to completely degrade a young woman who made him feel inferior, which is his own fault because people can't make you feel inferior without your consent. You consented to feeling that way if that's how you feel about yourself. I did not personally attack him. I simply refused to agree with his perspective. And if your self-esteem and your self-concept is that easily rocked by people choosing to maintain their perspective and not agreeing with you, then that is a you problem. And I speak that as someone who has felt that way before, where I felt really unmoored when people refused to agree with me because it made me feel uncomfortable. That was a me problem. I had to learn how to become secure enough in myself as a person and my views so as to not feel attacked or targeted by people choosing to not subscribe to the same belief systems as I do. I had to have enough belief in my ability to learn and support what I believe in, that I'm not reliant on reassurance from other people. And if you have gotten to the middle age that you are as a grown-ass adult without the ability to do that, and without the ability to have even young people that you view as less educated and less knowledgeable and less intelligent than yourself, if you cannot handle that, then my question to people like that is, why even appear online? The other thing that I found so interesting about this whole circumstance is how he said to people on his page that like what he says goes on his page, and that like he gets to set the tone of what he talks about, and that it's like basically his place, and he gets to curate what he wants people to talk about and what is okay to say and what isn't, and what comments he can delete and what he can't keep up. Because I found that interesting, because the conversation I think irritated him and sent him on this spiral occurred on my page. So does that same logic not apply to other pages? Like, do you have such a sense of entitlement that you feel entitled to agreement and support even on the pages of other people? Very odd altogether. And personally for me, like I'm a little irritated by the fact that he felt the need to do this, because it's just fucking annoying. Like, it's like I'd rather go about my day without having like some old dude just bitching about me on his page, and then like trying to do it in a sneaky ass way where he blocks me and then goes, I'm not going to name this person, but if you want to do your own looking, feel free. And then of course, like, people know who I am, so they fucking named me, and like, it's fine. But also it's like, just like, grow some fucking balls and just tag me, man. Like, if I was gonna talk about you, I would name you, and I sure as fuck wouldn't block you, because I'm not a coward, you know? Like, I might be young and I might still be learning, and I might be a woman, oh my gosh, but anytime I have talked about people, no matter how prevalent they are in society, I don't block them. I allow them the opportunity to speak to me and give me their perspective, because if you're going to talk about people and essentially talk shit about them, then you should be opening the dialogue for them to share their perspective. And if you close that dialogue, you are a fucking coward, especially as someone who has more years of experience and has a self-proclaimed wider breadth of knowledge to share. You should be opening the door for that conversation rather than closing it. And the same goes to blocking commenters who disagree with you for commenting. If you think you have a wide breadth of knowledge to share, you should be able to turn disagreement comments into learning experiences, or at the bare minimum, maintain your perspective with strong enough belief that you don't need people to just like kiss your ass and support everything you do if they're going to partake in being on your page, because that is just cowardly and very juvenile. And what I hate the most about people doing stuff like this is that they try to degrade people like me based off of our age and infantilize us and make us out to be like unknowledgeable and young and naive. Meanwhile, they're engaging in behaviors that are very childish. Blocking anyone who stands up for the person you're criticizing, or disagrees with the concepts you're putting out, or contradicts any statement that you make, that's really fucking childish. In doing so, you're creating an echo chamber that serves the only purpose of stroking your ego and creating a selfish entitlement, which is a quote that he used for me. Creating an echo chamber that is all about just like stroking your ego and agreeing with you, and no other comments that go anything against what you're saying, if anything, is the epitome of selfish entitlement, because it's all about you and your feelings and having your perspective reaffirmed, and creating an echo chamber so you can curate a comment section that is dedicated to ripping down a young trainer and making it out to look like no one else disagrees with what you're saying. That is the epitome of selfish entitlement and childishness. I don't take what people like this say to heart, because I know who I am. I know what I put out. And if people are committed to misunderstanding me, that is not my problem. because what he's saying is simply not fucking true. It's not true. It's a story that he has curated to serve the purpose of the story that he wants to believe. He's rewritten how I show myself to be as a person, how I share information, how experienced I am, how I've learned, how I've shared what I have learned, and my overall experience. He's fictionalized it to serve his agenda. And if you need to do that, you probably don't have a very good point. Because if you need to make up lies about people in order to have a reason to target them, then you don't really have an adequate reason to be talking about them in the first place or taking issue with them. If you need to take stuff deliberately out of context just to like shame people, then you don't really have any leg to stand on in criticizing them, because if you have to rewrite the story in order to have a story in the first place, then what you're doing is you're just spreading propaganda. And that's honestly not what I'm here for, because I don't want to create an echo chamber. That's not conducive to learning. And it's also just going to impact my own learning by essentially creating confirmation bias and making it so that I only immerse myself in environments where people are going to reaffirm the same ideas or agree with mine. And I don't want that, because people should have the right to disagree. And people can disagree, and disagreeing doesn't mean they're entitled to me agreeing with them. It doesn't mean that they're sharing their disagreement. It means that I have to support them and be like, yeah, you're right, I'll consider that. And this can be the case even if I'm wrong and they actually are right, you know, like they're still not entitled to my agreement. And that comes with sharing your opinion online. You're not entitled to anyone's agreement. And while people can curate their pages to be whatever they want and they can block whoever contradicts them, if you're actually committed to teaching people and learning yourself and expanding your knowledge, that's not something people do. It's one thing if people are being blatantly disrespectful and you're just trying to create a healthy environment for yourself and the people on your page. But if it goes to the point of deleting anyone who contradicts you, you're not there to learn and expand your own knowledge or anyone else's, because you're trying to create an echo chamber. You're trying to create a place where conversation is only allowed if it is in support of you and your ideas and all of them. And that, one, isn't an indicator of security and comfortability in like the information that you share. And two, it is very egotistical and narcissistic. I've been accused of being narcissistic from a lot of people because they think that the reason why I share stuff about horse welfare and like the changes that I've made and why I have these really strong beliefs is because there's some like narcissistic motivation where I just want my own ego stroked. But if that were the case, then I would honestly have like a freaking shame kink, because people disagree with me more when I'm going against the status quo than they would if I was saying really safe stuff that kind of is sitting in the neutral position where you're less likely to have anyone disagree with you. If I did stuff like that, I would be exposed to a lot less criticism and hate. But since I target ideas that are really charged and controversial, I get a lot of people degrading me. And like, if my goal was just to have my ego stroked and to have people tell me I'm awesome, I'm not fulfilling that whatsoever in doing what I'm doing. And my motivation in posting online is not just to be liked. Like, I very much am not liked because of the things that I'm going up against. Like, I'm criticizing major international organizations like the FEI. I'm criticizing mindsets and beliefs and training methods that we have maintained and held for years and really believed in. I'm criticizing all of these things that people don't want to have to consider are wrong. And it triggers them when I do this. It makes them feel uncomfortable, and it makes them feel like they are being personally attacked because they self-identify with the methodologies and belief systems that they have to such an extent that they don't like having it be contradicted, and it makes them viscerally uncomfortable. And if I didn't do that stuff and I played it safer, I would be more palatable to a wider audience and I would get more compliments. And if I trained my horses in a more exciting way and did more with them and showed more and like prioritized these things that are more mainstream, I would get more applause and I would get more respect and I would get people treating me nicer. And I've made the express choice to not do that because I would rather stand behind my own authenticity and my own morals and my own beliefs and what I'm comfortable with and what I think is right than to sell out simply for attention. And I think that the people who try to project these types of traits onto me are actually exemplifying parts of themselves. They're exemplifying their own internal motivations and why they do things, and projecting those traits onto me because they cannot fathom someone sticking to their guns and posting controversial content and sharing their beliefs on things for the purpose of that actually being what they believe in and not having it be motivated by attention. In creating my platforms, like, I'm really happy with how I have managed to create my platforms because it has given me a lot of opportunities that, as someone with low finances and the lack of ability to participate in traditional equestrian culture to the extent that you can if you have lots of money to show and get noticed that way, social media has given me a lot of opportunities that I don't think I otherwise would have had, like such as sponsorships and whatnot. Because if I didn't have the following, I wouldn't be beneficial to companies to sponsor because I can't afford to show enough. So it's given me lots of opportunities that I'm grateful for. But my following is kind of just the byproduct of me sharing my truths online, be they bad or good. And it's been the byproduct of me sharing my story and sharing about training my horses. It's not something that I've like intentionally plotted out and tried to do. And if I were to hire a social media manager, there's a lot of stuff they would probably tell me not to do because it's impacting the growth of my socials, such as engaging in controversial discussion and talking about things that people view as political on my pages. I actually impact my own ability to grow and use the channel to generate more revenue and more attention and more views in doing that. And that's a choice that I've made because I think it's the right thing to do. I think that I should use my platform to talk about uncomfortable topics and to share them with a wider audience, because otherwise, what's the point in me having a wider audience? And the fact that it's impacted my views just goes to show that a lot of people don't want to see those things, but that also means that they need to be seen more because they're being deliberately suppressed because so many people want to look the other way. And that is why I think it's so important to do. I could create a greater following and more support by altering the way that I do things, and I choose not to do it because I don't align with that personally. And I think that it's important to have these types of discussions, whether or not people agree with them or not. And even now, like, I'm sure I'm going to go back and look at like podcasts I did and posts that I did and things that I believed in during this timeline that I'm not going to subscribe to in a few years from now, or that I'll have slightly altered mindsets about, because that's the nature of growth. You change as you learn more, and that's going to perpetually continue happening for me because I don't intend to stagnate my growth. And I think that's very important. Now, what I do think is that I do think that I'm subjected to a lot more criticism than I would be if I had a penis and if I identified as a man. And if I was a man sharing the same opinions in the same way, I wouldn't be viewed as aggressive or bitchy in the same way. And I think that I'm subjected to a lot of criticisms that are very specific to me being a young woman. And I'm also well aware of the fact that if I was less white passing, I would be subjected to even more of these criticisms. And I have privilege and protection from the standpoint that a lot of people are just going to perceive me as being white. But even with that privilege, I still am subjected to a level of criticism and disrespect that I would not be exposed to if I were another gender. I don't think I would be spoken to in the same way. I wouldn't be infantilized as much. I wouldn't be degraded. I wouldn't have my knowledge immediately questioned. I have to prove myself so much more than I would have to if I was part of a demographic that was so publicly trusted and viewed as knowledgeable and powerful and a leadership role. I have to prove myself more in order to get the same amount of attention because I am a young woman. If I was even the same age that I am, if I was a young man, people would be more inclined to believe what I do and not question it. And that is just the reality of things. And whether or not people want to agree with this, I really don't care, because there's enough studies that have shown that there's an inherent gender bias between men and women, to the point where if people even without seeing what you look like, if they read a female name in the signature of an email, they speak with more disrespect to the female person than they do to a male counterpart with a traditionally male sounding name replying to them. And this has been shown in a lot of different industries and a lot of different circumstances. So I'm inclined to believe it because I've noticed it for myself. And there's also studies that support this notion. And there's also signs that like despite this being a female dominated industry and there being a ton of really successful, amazing female equestrians and trainers, there are still men that are getting platforms to a far greater degree despite there being more women. And while those men might be talented in certain aspects for sure, and this isn't to degrade everything that they do, there's also a lot of talented women. And I think the reason why we see so many men being platformed to the level that they are is because of that bias. The men that are getting the most attention for their training programs, their TV shows, their methods that they're selling and getting platformed the most. Like if you think of the most internationally noticed trainers across the board, like for like it'll be like Warwick Schiller, Clinton Anderson, Pat Pirelli, like Buck Brannaman, and they're all men. They're all men. And I don't think that that is just a matter of them being more talented or better at marketing. I think it's the fact that their marketing works better because they are men. And again, like I don't like all of those trainers. Obviously, like I've talked about Clinton Anderson and how I think his methods are harmful. I think what he perpetuates in his methodology is actually very dangerous, and it endangers a lot of horses and a lot of people. And he causes a lot of welfare problems in horses and is really quite abusive in how he trains horses. And he also speaks really ill of women and has literally said in interviews that women cause a lot of problems with horses. So that's again another example of how accepted it is to degrade and blame women for certain things and to basically use your platform to do that and not see as much criticism as you could. Whereas like even if I share and go, oh, like men have privilege that women don't, people feel like that is too far, and I'll get more criticism for that than people will be for being belligerently misogynistic. So basically what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of things that are present in the horse world that are indicators of there being a lot of misogyny and a lot of gender bias. And I think the fact that so many of the most internationally acclaimed and noticed and talked about and shared and supported trainers across the board are male, I think it is because of that gender bias. I think the fact that there's so many male riders at the upper levels, but very few at the lower levels when you're looking around is a result of that gender bias. I think that men are oftentimes given more opportunities and given more leadership than female counterparts are because there are less of them in the community. And I also think that when they do start to climb the levels, they're more inherently trusted and viewed as better experts than other people, especially for difficult horses, because there's this notion that difficult to train horses and problem horses are not something a woman can manage because they're too powerful and strong and rank and dangerous, and women are too soft and meek and mild to handle these powerful, dangerous beasts, and they need the hand of a man. And that mindset is still super pervasive in the community. It's behind the dominance-based theory. It's behind why there's so much vitriolic hatred and outright rejection of positive reinforcement, and even considering even the most intermittent, fleeting, light uses of it in training. Like even if people didn't use it for riding, teaching things like trailer loading and stuff, there is so much rejection towards positive reinforcement despite it being the superior way to teach horses how to load safely and reliably. And I think that is rooted in this dominance-based culture that at its core is about projecting a lot of toxic masculinity aspects into the horse world, and in doing so, it's devaluing and marginalizing women and female presenting people in the process. And it also opens the door for women to be overtly disrespected and just have to prove themselves that much more to show that they're valuable. Like for me to even racing is a great example too. For me to prove myself as an exercise rider in racing, I had people look at me right away and go, oh, there's no way she can ride this horse. He's too big and powerful for her. She's going to get run off on, because they just look at my body and like me being a woman and be like, oh, he needs a man. And a lot of the horses that I did ride, if they eventually did give me the chance for whatever reason, I did a better job than the men because I didn't fight with them as much. And the horse who was being stressed and was being strong and unpredictable because of that stress became quieter under me. And I did a good job on these horses, and I was able to train them with a gentle hand and bring them along. It might not look like the same way some of the men might have brought along the horses, but it still worked, and it got the same or better results, oftentimes better, because I'd actually address the underlying cause of stress. This is something that I've just noticed like everywhere. And like my age is also a huge part of it. I think that if I was middle-aged and could use that to my advantage and be like, I have like 30 plus years of horse experience and like being older and appearing more experienced, because also I look young for my age. So I think that also plays a role too. But I noticed that young men are not treated the same way that young women who are trying to establish themselves in the horse world are. And they are given the benefit of the doubt more so than what women are offered. And it's a damn shame, because it closes the door for there to be more diversity in the sport, and it just perpetuates viewpoints that are harmful to women in and out of the horse world. And it also perpetuates these belief systems and these training methods that are showing signs of, one, either being unethical, or two, being less effective, or both. And they continue to get perpetuated and used and widely bought into and believed in because of the people who are standing behind them, even if the people who are standing behind them are committed to justifying that method at any cost and looking for confirmation bias and rejecting anything that says otherwise. And that's what I see a lot. I think that's why people are so threatened by positive reinforcement, because it's something that they vehemently don't even want to consider doing, but then they see these trainers getting more and more attention and more clients, and it's scaring them because they're worried about losing their clientele. I do think that that's a huge part of it. But anyways, like in all, like, misogyny is alive and well in the horse world. We see it in how people talk about mares. We see it in how women who are passionate and assertive about things that they believe in are labeled as emotional or bitchy or aggressive, whereas men who do the same thing, oftentimes in a far more blunt and degrading manner, are not perceived that way. We see it in how people blame mares' reactions on being hormonal or bitchy or a mare when they could be reacting to pain, stress, or any number of things. They get it blamed on their sex, whereas if a gelding does the same thing, it's not going to be attributed to him being a gelding. And it is very ever present in the horse world. And whether people want to acknowledge that or not, it is there. And I think we would all benefit from actually pointing out the elephant in the room. Even if you can overcome these oppressive forces and still make a name for yourself, making it easier for people to climb up the ladder without having to meet as many obstacles is a really noble cause, regardless of whether or not you felt that you needed to have that to help you climb the ladder. It doesn't devalue the work that you've put in. I've put in a lot of work to get to where I am, and helping make it easier for other people and helping to undo discriminatory tendencies doesn't change how hard I've worked. And also admitting to the fact that I'm privileged for being white passing doesn't degrade how hard I've worked either. It's just admitting that there's certain obstacles that I don't encounter as someone who is perceived as a white person, because I would be even more disrespected and devalued if people viewed me as being a black woman, because they are one of the most discriminated against groups. And anyways, the last thing that I want to note is that there have also been things that men have said to me to try to degrade and devalue what I do that they would never frickin' say to a man. An example that I can remember from TikTok is that, on a completely unrelated thing, it was about like horse training, like hog tying a horse or doing something really aggressive to handle a really scared horse. And this one guy just goes, "Oh, I bet you're like anti-abortion," or no, he said, "I bet you're pro-abortion. And I bet that you like are a baby killer. I bet you've had like 6 abortions in your life." And I was like, what the actual fuck? Like, one, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. And two, you look at me and you go, "Oh, she has a uterus, so therefore she must be a freaking promiscuous girl who's gotten pregnant that many times and has aborted the babies." Like, one, he's thinking about how much sex I have. Super fucking weird in a context about talking about horses. Guaranteed he's not going to say that to a man and be like, "Oh, like, I bet you fuck a lot of women, man." Or if he did, it would be viewed as a compliment. It wouldn't be viewed in the same way. But he probably wouldn't even bring it up. But instead, for me, he's basically saying, like, "I bet you fuck around a lot and have a lot of baby daddies who then kill their babies." And fucking weird ass thing to say, nothing to do with the discussion at hand. It was being used to degrade and devalue me as a person and reduce me to essentially being a baby incubator that people use for sex, and then I allegedly kill babies, even though like getting an abortion is not that, but we're not going to get into that here. And I've also had people be like, "Oh, I bet you accuse men of raping you too. I bet you've done so many false rape allegations." Again, super fucking weird thing to say in the context of horse training. They would never say that to another man, even if they disagreed with them. And essentially, they're saying that me being assertive and setting boundaries and calling out problematic behaviors in the industry means that I would falsely accuse people of rape, which also, if people are that paranoid about being falsely accused of rape, I am personally of the mind that they are possibly doing things that are sexual assaulty, because you shouldn't be worried about that if you're actually appropriately seeking consent, because false allegations are extremely uncommon. But if you're paranoid about that, I think that there's underlying guilt there. If you're paranoid to the point of bringing it up in a completely unrelated conversation, I think there's something there where you are doing something that is a little bit sketch, or more than a little bit sketch, because it's a weird thing to bring up. And it's also essentially labeling impassioned women as just liars who are doing these things just for attention and to just like insult and attack men for no reason. So it's degrading people who are potentially victims for what they say in a completely unrelated context. It's immediately supporting people who might be sexually assaulting women. And it's degrading women to the point where you're assuming that anyone who has a viewpoint where they are standing up against men is going to try to incriminate a person using false accusations. So it's just all in all a very weird attitude, and it's one that you would never see directed at men by other men. It's something that's specific to being a woman. And I've even had people go as far as like, if they scroll down to my videos enough and they like find any video where I'm like walking around in like a sports bra or bathing suit, they will slut shame me there too, because they're mad about my training videos. And once again, it has nothing to fucking do with anything I'm saying on any of my platforms, and nothing to do with anything I say about horse training. It's deflecting to a completely unrelated point for the sole purpose of degrading me, using tactics that are only typically directed at women. And that is the example of the immense misogyny that we see in the horse community. And frankly, like, I'm just tired of it. It's a really tired argument. It's a really stupid argument. It always stems from men who have nothing else to argue and that they don't have any real points. They have to go to the like low blow shots where they are bringing up things with the purpose of trying to just make someone feel bad about themselves. Another example of this is criticizing someone's appearance. I have been told by men that they're like, oh, I bet you're going to die alone with a lot of cats. Like, no man's going to want to be with you. You're going to keep getting left and you're going to be single forever because no one's going to want to be with someone like you. Like, no man would ever want you. Or they'll like insult my appearance, be like, you're ugly and like blah, 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 blah. Like, with that attitude, no one's gonna want you. Like, good luck ever finding a man. And they'll like, again, basically equate my value to how desirable men find me, which is fucking weird and also has nothing to do with horse training yet again. And two, assuming that I live my life looking for a man to like make my life better, and that it's inherently embarrassing to want to like just live with my animals who don't fucking give me a hard time and who don't say misogynistic bullshit and who aren't sexist. Like, what's wrong with that, first of all? And like, the cat thing is like a tactic that is used by men all over in any type of circumstance to degrade women. Same with like implying that they're going to be alone forever because they viewed like that as the worst thing that could ever happen to a woman, is like not being desired by a man. Like, oh my God, that's so terrible. That's going to really hurt her. But again, like, these things are only brought up to women typically, and in completely unrelated topics. They have nothing to do with the topic at hand. Absolutely nothing. And it's ridiculous. And again, like, I've even seen men do it to other women where they'll insult their weight, they'll insult other aspects of their appearance, they'll be fat phobic, they'll be completely just degrading to someone's overall appearance, and just say like these basically like what I would consider misogyny battle cries, where it's like, oh, there it is. You can tell that the guy secretly fucking hates women with how he's talking about them. And it's weird and gross. And again, like, not that it would be okay in any circumstance, but it's just so far out of left field when we are discussing horses and horse training. Like, my appearance and how I look, who I date, who I sleep with, how I spend my time outside of horses. None of those things have anything to do with any of my opinions on horse training and anything I say about horses in general. And they do nothing to actually counter any points I make pertaining to horses. It is all rooted in trying to just make me feel shitty about myself as a person, as a means of trying to further their argument by impacting my self-esteem using completely baseless arguments that they would not say to a man. And maybe in some fluke occurrence, they might, but this is an attitude that is predominantly projected at women. And you don't see men attacked for how they look, who they sleep with, whether or not they're like with a woman, completely out of left field for no reason at all. Like you might see someone say that joke to a guy that they live in their mom's basement when they are being misogynistic and shitty, because then the implication is that you're being so disgusting to women that you couldn't land one. And it's a similar frame of thinking for like the insult, but the context is abundantly different. Lastly, the one thing I'll touch on is that the fat phobia in the horse world is predominantly directed at women. Curvy women riding horses are oftentimes, by other women as well, told that they are too big for their horses, made fun of for their weight, made to feel incredibly shitty, and called out for like hurting their horse. When men, like large men, they might not necessarily look like curvy per se, but they'll be large men who are like 6 foot and probably like around 180 plus pounds. They can ride around on little 2-year-old quarter horses and no one fucking bats an eye. No one. Despite the fact that a lot of times they weigh as much or more a lot of times than the women being criticized because they hold their weight differently because they are a woman. And you do not see the same fat phobia directed at men at all. Even when men are occasionally criticized for being too big for the horses, it's oftentimes centered around the fact that it's young horses who are being ridden and they're like 13, 14 hand, 2-year-old quarter horses being ridden by heavy men that are like 180 pounds, like heavy in terms of compared to the size of the horse and the underdeveloped back, plus the weight of the tack, which is like 20 to 30 plus pounds typically. And in that circumstance, they're not body shaming the men most of the time, whereas women are getting body shamed and they'll just shit all over their fucking appearance for no reason. And like other women do this too. So it's like a learned behavior in that regard too. But it's like disproportionately criticizing women for their appearance and their weight when the same criticism is not applied to men in the same way. And this is just a few examples. Like I'm sure people will have more. Like if you listen to this, feel free in the comments to comment where you've noticed like differences in how women are spoken to and treated, and like certain things that women are held to standard wise that men aren't in and out of the horse world. I'd be really interested to hear because I know there's more. I'm going off of the top of my head for this. I don't script any of my podcasts, so I'm not going to be able to think of any of them. And I'm sure once I end this, I'm going to think of more. But yeah, feel free to share your stories and feel free to give your insights on ways where you have experienced discrimination in the horse world based on your gender identity and why. Because it's something that needs to change. It is really fucking tiresome to have people immediately like put me in a box because of my gender and decide certain traits on my behalf because of my gender, or decide whether or not I'm intelligent, knowledgeable, successful because of my gender. And I'm tired of it. It's something that follows me in and out of the horse world. There's also the whole crazy horse girl stereotype, which is misogynistic at its core, because you don't see the crazy horse boy stereotype. And yes, there's less men in the horse world, but women are shamed for liking horses too much. They're shamed for liking cats too much. They're sexualized for riding horses. Men aren't. And they're sexualized for merely existing. Men aren't, not in the same way. And even when they are, it's usually through the standard of like the male gaze. Like a lot of movies and like photo shoots and stuff that people will bring up to be like, oh, see, men are sexualized too. It's usually within the context of like a man writing the script and it being like to appeal to what men think women want rather than what women actually want. And it's just rampant everywhere. I have had people, now that I'm on dating apps and I'm single and I say that I'm self-employed and I have my own business, I've had men be like, oh, do you want me to help you make your business successful? Like off the bat. They assume that because I'm a woman, I couldn't have a successful business. When a man says they're an entrepreneur, it's like, oh, great. Like, what do you do? That's so amazing. Like, congrats. That's great. It's really hard to start a business. But when men who oftentimes don't own their own business meet a female entrepreneur, their insecurity comes out by way of insinuating that she could not possibly manage her own business to a point of success without the help of men. And I have also had men reply to me and be like, oh, so like you're a business owner. Hey, that means you own 51% of your business. And the implication is that I couldn't create my own business. I couldn't own 100% of it, that I could only own 1% over so that I can say that I'm the sole business owner or the primary business owner, but that it's not really a real ownership of a business. And that's just dripping with internalized misogyny because men don't have their success questioned in the same way. They don't have their ability to be a leader and like run a business and be entrepreneurial and be successful questioned in the same way. I've had men tell me that the woman's job is to like be taken care of by a man and that like I shouldn't be running a business. And I'm just like, okay, fuck you. Go find a woman who wants to do that then. And again, like these are mindsets that are predominantly projected onto women. And even aspects of the patriarchal society that benefit women, such as the implication that men should always pay for the date, those stem from a patriarchal society where women used to not be able to have their own bank accounts and where they used to be the stay-at-home wives who didn't work or have jobs, so they couldn't buy things because they didn't have their own bank accounts and they weren't supposed to work. And that is where that stems from. So even if men hate those aspects of things, it stems from a society where women didn't have the same amount of rights as men and largely still don't. And as a result, have adapted to that by being reliant on men for certain things. And a lot of those traditional mindsets are still hold today. I can buy my own shit. I don't need a man to buy me anything. And the implication that some women use men for like free meals on dating sites has also been something that's been projected on me. And it's like, look, dude, like it's enough of a chore to go out with someone that I wouldn't go out with someone I wasn't actually interested in just for a free meal. Like no meal is worth that amount of work, you know? And while some people might do that, that might be a driving factor for some people to just kind of put all women into that boat and blame them all for that, when at its core that entire concept is stemming from a patriarchal society is just problematic. So anyways, I've gone off on a tangent about a lot of things that are outside of the horse world, but that's just a few examples of the misogyny that I deal with on a regular basis, and just like the implication of me being inherently less knowledgeable, experienced, able to run a business because I'm a woman. And also just being perpetually sexualized no matter what I do. Like sexualized for riding horses. Like, do you want to ride me like you ride that horse? Like, oh, have you ever fucked your horse? Like, all this shit. You never see them fucking asking male equestrians that. It's so weird. And again, like horse girls are made to feel weird for those concepts that men conjure up in their heads, which says more about the men. If they're thinking about, they see a horse and their immediate mind goes to fucking the horse, that says a lot about them. That's like super weird, and there's probably something going wrong with them internally if that's the way that they think things. And instead that discomfort and like their gross thinking is projected onto women, and the women are made to like be the weirdos for riding horses in a completely like normal way and not sexualizing themselves at all. And yeah, it's just not fair. There's a lot of tropes and mindsets that are like rooted in a misogyny. Another example would be that like telling someone to grow some balls, which is a term I used earlier in this podcast that I need to train myself out of. It is implying to tell someone to be like braver and tougher and like, yeah, toughen up and be stronger. Whereas calling someone a pussy is a degrading term to be like, oh, you're weak-minded. You're like, you're like cowardly, you're lesser than, despite the fact that if you fucking flick someone in the balls, they're going to be doubled over in pain, and a fucking pussy can shoot a whole ass baby out of it. So realistically, we should be calling people pussies for being strong and resilient, and telling people to like take their balls off and grow a fucking pussy if they want to be stronger. And even terms like bitch or like, oh, like you hit like a girl or whatever, like all of these things are used as terms that are bad, that are about female like centered concepts and are about using terms that are specific to women to degrade others. And that's a habit I'm trying to get myself out of, because like I think that that's wrong, that a lot of these insults are rooted in essentially likening someone to being a woman or being a female animal, like it's a bad thing, and like it means that you're more like emotional and like hormonal and aggressive and like all over the place and like less able to handle things because of your hormones. And it's just freaking stupid. And those are just like the more like hidden like contexts of misogyny is just the language used and how we degrade other people, and how many degradation terms are rooted in essentially likening people to women. And anyways, that is my TED Talk for the day. Thank you for listening. I know that kind of took like a bunch of different routes because, again, I have ADHD. Hello, this is the Stream of Consciousness podcast. Buckle the fuck up. But I think it's an important topic, and I think it's something that more people need to consider, because I think that even people who don't necessarily realize where they're being like typecasted and treated a certain way because of their gender identity, I think that there are microaggressions that people have kind of grown immune to and have kind of become accustomed to and desensitized to the point where they don't even notice it, and they don't even think about it through the lens of like, yeah, like a man wouldn't be spoken to like this. This is a way that they're speaking to me simply because I'm a woman, and they think they can get away with it more. And what I've noticed too is now that women are becoming more outspoken and are more assertive and are better at setting boundaries and are becoming more comfortable in doing so, men take that as unfairness and like man hatred. Men take that as like hating men and like being like against men and being like a man-hating woman, when really it's about boundary setting and telling people when they're crossing a line and when they're disrespecting you, and actually openly saying it instead of just taking it. And it's the same thing if you dare disagree with a man. They are so like emasculated by a woman having the audacity to just not immediately agree with them and pander to their viewpoint and like pat them on the head and be like, oh, you're so right, like I'm just a silly old woman, I couldn't like know this without your help, and like just like deferring to their opinion. When you don't do that, they are like so wounded and hurt by it that they fucking throw a tantrum. And then these same people are often the ones who are trying to equate women to being the emotional ones who can't control themselves and shouldn't be running the show because they're too emotional and that they can't be rational. And lastly, the thing that I want to talk about is that in a lot of relationships, when I've held my ground and set boundaries and called people out for shitty behavior, I have spoken in a voice where I'm not raising my voice most of the time. And I have, one, identified what behaviors exactly I've been offended by, why they are offensive and why they are a problem and why I won't tolerate them, and then the boundary that I want to set, and just basically hold the person accountable. When I have done that, I have been called irrational. When I have held my ground in debate topics that have been brought up in my areas of expertise, mind you, so like animal cognition and behavior, that these men have never studied. And when I've held my ground and maintained my viewpoint and said, look, like, how much time have you spent studying this? Have you read any studies on this? Do you have anything to back your belief point that is contrary to mine? And they don't. They're just like, I'm just playing devil's advocate. And then they're like trying to still argue, but I'm like, you haven't put any work into developing an actual debate, and you're trying to go head to head with me on an equal playing field when I actually have merit to what I am saying, and you're just pulling things out of your ass just simply to be contrary to me. And then when I hold my ground there and just be like, look, like if you want to have a real debate on this topic, like at least put work in to have a point that goes against mine, that isn't just rooted in you trying to just be against me for whatever reason. And then I'm called irrational and argumentative for not considering a perspective that they have not put any work into studying and forming an educated opinion on, that they have only developed simply for the sole purpose of degrading my viewpoint and trying to make me feel stupid. And then when it doesn't work, and when I hold my ground and say that they are wrong, I am made out to be the bad guy. I am made out to be the one that cannot have a rational discussion and can't have a rational debate. But their version of what is irrational is simply me holding my ground and not agreeing with them. And it's wild to me. There are so many like layers to this that I have noticed, like in romantic relationships, in platonic relationships, and in working relationships, and even with strangers, like I've mentioned. And I'm kind of still like unpacking just how many of these are rooted in misogyny. There's one situation that I remember in particular. I can't remember the exact like topic that we were discussing, but it was with an ex, and I told him that he was wrong about it, and I was like, you're wrong and here's why. And he's like, no, I don't think so, and basically held his ground and was like, you're wrong, I believe this, I don't care what you have to say. And I was like, I can literally pull up stuff that confirms this perspective and shows you why it's true. And he was having none of it. And then like a few days later, out of the blue, like some guy, like a man, one of his friends that is a man, brought up like the same topic and reaffirmed what I said. And then he believed it when a man said it, even though I offered to bring up the same sourcing that his friend used. He believed it right away. I actually remember what it is about now. It was about how Canadian political party leaders had voted in terms of like their standpoint on abortion and reproductive rights. And he didn't want to believe what I said. And despite the fact that you can look it up and confirm it, he completely degraded my point. And then as soon as a man confirmed the same perspective, suddenly it was like, oh, that's true. Because they can't handle being or feeling inferior to a woman because they can learn something from them. And that is just one example of that same instance happening. And I've also think that I've been the victim of a lot of emotional abuse that is rooted in the insecurity of me running my own business, while a lot of the guys I've dated, because this is the most normal thing, work for other people, which is totally fine. But in their insecurity, despite me never degrading their jobs or making them feel inferior with how I behave, their insecurity causes them to try to degrade what I do and like degrade the amount of work I put in and make it out to be that I'm just like sitting at home all day doing nothing and that I don't have a real job. And it's bullshit. So anyways, there's so many different layers to these types of mindsets, and they come out in so many different types of relationships. The last one I'll briefly touch on, which I know I've said this like 3 times, is the idea of the friend zone. The friend zone is viewed as a consolation prize. When you don't want to be intimate with a man and you only view him as a friend, and he's put in that category as a friend, rather than being thrilled to be platonically involved with you and liking you enough as a person that they just are happy with being your friend, instead it's made out to be that this is some consolation prize and that your friendship is inferior to anything else, and that all they were seeking was a sexual or romantic relationship with you. And it's really hurtful to women, because then it's like, okay, cool. Like this guy who was hanging out with you and being nice to you, you find out that they were only doing it because they wanted to fuck you. And then it's like, okay, cool. So like they don't actually like me as a person unless they can like be intimate with me. And that is super shitty. Whereas women don't do the same thing. Like the friend zone is not viewed through the same context. Even if you really like a guy and you'd like a romantic relationship with them, it might hurt to not get that and to have them not be interested. But if you can be friends with them, a lot of people are just happy with that and they'll accept it. Like the amount of women I know who have been close friends with people that they've been attracted to and that they would have wanted more with, and have done so with grace, even as those people go on to date other girls, is a lot. And they're not made to feel like they never make the men feel like it's a consolation prize or like it's an insult to be friend zoned. They never cut off the friendship in the same way and go like, oh, I don't want this if it's just friends, or if you don't want to like sleep with me. It's not viewed through the same context. There's just so many differences in society in terms of how women are perceived to men that are inherently unfair and are inherently misogynistic. And now that they're being called out more, a lot of people are framing it as if like misogyny is just like a buzzword that people say for no reason, and then it's like they degrade it. Like I've also seen men do this where they degrade it and be like, oh, that's just a term we've heard on TikTok that people use for everything now. And it's like, no, we live in a patriarchal society, which is why this term is brought up so much, because it truly is that deeply rooted in behavior, especially by men whose first thing is to degrade women by saying they learned something on TikTok, as if they couldn't have learned it from personal experience and studying like actual quantifiable, statistically analyzed aspects of sexism that are easily accessible to anyone. So anyways, misogyny is real. It is present, and we can't really go like on the concept of like, I don't see gender identity whatsoever, so long as people are being persecuted for theirs deliberately or discriminated against and treated as an inferior person because of it. And we need to talk about these biases in order to expose them and bring attention to them, because it is important to do so. And it is ever present in the horse world, despite the horse world being so female dominated. It is extremely present. And we see it in how people are spoken to, how people are treated, and how women's insights are often written off and how they are perceived. And it is just so ingrained everywhere in our culture that of course it's going to touch the horse world. Of course it's going to impact us despite being female dominated, because again, a lot of women project these ideologies because it's what they've been taught to do. It has. So Anyways, I'm a young woman, but I'm a young, powerful, passionate person who is working on myself always and who wants to make things easier for the younger generations of women and allow them to feel empowered and holding their ground and setting boundaries, even with men who are older and have been alive longer than them and who are men who try to quiet their voices. You don't need to hush your voice just because a man is trying to talk over top of you. Call them the fuck. Okay, I thought of one more thing, actually. Another example of misogyny is the director of solidarity of the FEI interrupting me like 4 times in the middle of a question panel. Do you think he would have done that to a middle-aged man? Because he wouldn't have. I can almost fucking guarantee you. He would not have. He talked over top of me and he degraded my expertise as a person and was comfortable doing so in a highly public setting, despite the fact that those are rude behaviors, because of the fact that I'm a young woman. And he also tried to get me removed from the speaking panel by saying that I was loudmouth Canadian girl. Like, he called me a girl. I'm pretty sure that was like the quote, the girl, the Canadian girl. I'm a woman, but anyways, he tried to get me taken off the panel. And it's like, do you think he would do that to a middle-aged man who had like 30 plus years of experience in the horse world? Probably not. Probably not. It was me getting singled out because of the fact that I'm a young woman and it's viewed as an easier target, and he views his voice as more important than mine. But anyways, misogyny is alive and well in the world, and we need to extinguish it by refusing to accept certain levels of treatment and holding our ground and being proud in doing so, and not caring if people say that we are being emotional, belligerent, bitchy, like aggressive and whatever, because those are all traits that if a man exhibits them, it's viewed as a strength rather than a weakness, and they are not shamed for it. So fuck that. I'm not going to listen to that. Also, swearing and saying it's not ladylike, fuck you. I'm going to swear. That's partly why I swear so much, because people attribute swearing to not being ladylike. I don't have to speak any differently than anyone else just because I have a fucking vagina. Shut the fuck up. Anyways, thank you for listening to this very long podcast. And basically everything I say in terms of being devalued and degraded to people who have gender identities that are not being a cisgendered man, these same types of concepts apply in where they are going to be degraded and treated as lesser than, and a lot of times to a larger extent than cisgendered women are. And they're going to be treated with these discriminatory mindsets and be persecuted and attacked and marginalized because of who they are. So a lot of this mindset that surrounds misogyny is also behind a lot of the other hatred that we see, like with transphobia, for example. A lot of the people who are the most misogynistic are also going to be super fucking transphobic. It is really connected, and it's a similar type of discriminatory attitude where you view people as less human or less whatever because of their gender identity. So anyways, thank you for listening to this podcast. Let me know your thoughts. Comment your experiences down below in the description of the podcast. And as always, like, I appreciate everyone who listens to my podcast and supports my work. You can check out my store at the link down below. I sell bitless bridles, bitted bridles, and I have a huge sale going on all 2023 apparel. And then I've also released some really cool graphic design collections, including the clicker training collection, the barefoot hoof collection, the ethical equestrians collection, and the equine science collection. And those are all available down below. I also have webinars on my website on a variety of different topics that you can purchase. And I also have free resources on my website that you can purchase as well. And then I also have a Patreon that you can subscribe to that has well over 50 plus tutorials. And we do monthly Q&As that anyone can ask however many questions they want, and all sorts of other things like behind the scenes stuff. And like, you get first notice on other things. And all of these things just help me continue to be supported in doing my work. And it is extremely helpful, and I very much appreciate it. So thank you everyone for supporting my work. The podcast is something that I do for free. It is not monetized, and I really appreciate the outside support because it helps me continue doing what I'm doing. And since my computer has decided that it might want to break, I'm going to need all the help that I can get between that and Phoebe needing to get my dog, needing to get her other leg operated on for surgery. So any and all help is appreciated. I appreciate all of your support, and I appreciate the fact that people even like listening to these podcasts, because again, they're like unconventional, they're stream of consciousness. It's not super like structured and like amazing like some other people's podcasts are. When I have the time and ability to like hire an editor and get better equipment, I will up my game podcast wise, but right now I don't. So yeah, thank you for supporting my work. I really appreciate it. It helps me get ahead as someone who has had hardships in life and who has found support and community through the horse world, and who has been enabled to do a lot of the things that I can through the support of people on social media. So I immensely appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. And I'm just so grateful for your support. So thank you for listening to the Making Milestones podcast. Don't forget to check out the other ways to support me, and feel free to request other topics, because I always appreciate the motivation to talk about certain things and like a little bit of inspiration. So thanks.